Welcome to Saturday Soaring Sessions. Today I'm going to discuss the shadow. And we all have one. You can't walk down a street during the daytime or walk across a room without seeing a shadow. And the brighter the light, usually the darker the shadow, unless you're on a very reflective surface. And then you may not have any shadow at all if the light is straight above you. If you are your own beacon of light, where is your shadow? This is Hawk from Help a Hawk Healing, where we're freeing human hearts. And one aspect of freeing our heart is realizing our shadow. There are many aspects to our shadow, and there are many references to shadow from very ancient times to modern. So let's begin with something very ancient. We'll talk about Egypt and the Book of the Dead, the shoot, a part of the soul that is considered the shadow. This is an interesting concept that this is a soul part, not just our psyche, but our soul. And in fact, it is often depicted coming out of a tomb, slipping between a crack in the door. Human hearts were weighed in order to determine whether they were equal in weight to the feather or not, and therefore allowed a person to progress to the afterlife. This is a form of reincarnation, but it is also a form of, have you realized your shadow and have you surpassed it? The Greeks compare or imply that our shadow is our innermost desires and fears. And we have to realize that our shadow is not an evil thing. Now, we're in many folklores and many cultures, ancient and modern. The shadows are considered to be something to be feared, or something of darkness, or something of evil, something malevolent. I have actually had shadow figures around me that were malevolent, but I've also had shadow figures around me that were benign. You catch them out of the corner of your eye sometimes. Was that really there? Some of them are helpful and some of them are not. Who's to determine? But dealing with our own shadow, as we call it, what exactly is it? In Norse tradition, it was considered to be our fate or our destiny that was cast by the Norns. And that would be something that we would have to go through and overcome. In the Middle East, we have Kismet. We have no fate, but that which we are given, which comes from our higher self. Our higher self determines that there are certain things that we must overcome in life. Even if you don't believe in spirituality, there are certain things that you must overcome in life to be a realized human being. The shadow is part of that. In many religions and in many cultures, especially tribal cultures, we go through initiations to transform ourselves, to face ourselves, and to face our fears and to overcome them. And those fears are hidden in our shadow. They are not the sum total of our shadow, because there are also the things that we feel that we're not supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be the rock star. I'm not supposed to be the person who speaks loud. I'm not supposed to be the public person that is able to help others transform. So we hold ourselves back from what we're afraid we're incapable of doing instead of pushing ourselves. And many humans, I would dare say most humans, die with their song inside them, because Their shadow held them back. Realize the shadow, as I use it, is every bit of potential in every strand of every human DNA. Every human DNA contains within it the potential for every human action, and that's every bit of DNA ever produced from the past to now to the future. Every human DNA, even those that are mutated or aberrant in some way, will contain, do contain, or have contained the potential for every human action. Just as science proves that every now exists now, there is only now. We are viewing it as a film stroke. There is no past, present, or future. There is only now. And that's why being in the present is important for us. Even the cells that make up this body are not the cells that made up the body 10 years ago. That even includes the brain. At one time, scientists thought the brain was a fixed thing. It got to a certain point, and that was it. And now then, neuroscience is proving that completely wrong. The casting of shadows in certain spiritual traditions, such as in certain spell works or ceremonies, they're considered divine beings or spirits, or a link between the mortal material world and the divine or energetic world. And they're specifically used for that purpose. A specific shadow passing over a certain point in a mandala or a magic circle or something would be used for a specific purpose and a specific link. In the Orient, especially in China, we have the shadow puppets. And depending on how those shadow puppets are used and how the lighting is used is depending on the effect they have. And I've seen some very incredible displays just using candles behind a puppet that is very intricate, with its shadow being cast upon a screen. And that's kind of the way I see our life. That there is the energy or the potential of the quantum now. There's a bridge between it, which Anandamurti calls microvita, into the potentiated, or what we see as the reflected light. And inside this reflected light body, inside the illusion of solidity, is our shadow aspect. I'm currently reading and rereading The Shadow Effect by Deepak Chopra, Debbie Ford, and Marianne Williamson. And it's an incredible book. Every time I read it, I find out something more. And I find out something more about me. And that's part of why this channel exists. Just freeing human hearts. And freeing yourself from realizing you're being held back because you are enough. No matter what your shadow would have you believe, it's an illusion. So it's an illusion within an illusion of yourself. By never taking anything personally, you never fall into the shadow. And that's an incredible place to be, never taking anything personally. And believe me, I get tested on it regularly. From not just myself, but from others. Folklore considers the shadow to be something of mystery or unknown. If you'll ever watch as you're walking along, especially on a gravel road or in an undulating field where possible large clumps of grass have fallen over, your shadow conforms to whatever shape it goes up across. It's an incredible thing that light being blocked creates a shadow, creates a darkness. And that's why our moon is dark. And currently we're in the new moon, or shadow moon as people call it. It's the time of beginnings. It's the time where we realize what we've been working on and we start a new beginning. Now, Freud believed, and I'm not a huge fan of Freud, he limited us strictly to massive chemical and biological functions. But his shadow thing or description was our repressed or unwanted desires, those things that are unwanted by society. And I give credence to that. I'm not denying that Freud had an incredible intellect and that he had an incredible insight. I personally believe he held himself back. And that is part of why he and his greatest pupil, Carl Gustav Jung, who is credited with coming up with the shadow, when actually he is expressing his concept of the shadow, had a fallen out. I'm a hypnotist, a hypnotherapist. Freud discontinued using hypnosis because he wasn't good at inductions. He couldn't get people to go into trance. He also discontinued using cocaine personally and by prescribing it to his patients after he almost killed one. So by limiting himself to simply biological functions, he never expressed a more spiritual aspect, more emotional aspect. Jung considers our shadow the disowned and rejected parts of us that are not aligning with our conscious identity, our ego, our expression of ourselves, whom we want to be known as. Now, while we regulate the aspects of our personality, we all have a personality. We all have a mask we put out. And that's just the way it is. Our eyes see out. So this face is a mask. It's not the picture of who I am. If you saw my true being, it would just be a ball of light amongst many other balls of light. The great ising its isness as us. So when we are holding back or we are putting forward different aspects of our personality or our ego, working to get people to realize us as we want to be seen, that is part of our shadow. It is when we can express ourselves in our totality that we can overcome this. An interesting concept predates Jung by about 30 years is Peter Pan. Published in December 27th, 1904, Pan wants to reunite with his shadow. And he's chasing his shadow. That's how he wakes up Wendy. And in fact, he finally catches his shadow and has her sew it back to him. And the Lost Boys are children who want to remain children, who are led by Pan, who is a child, who's working to remain a child, yet he wants to be reunited with his shadow. Now, there are many theories about what Mari was working with and where he came up with these things, but I believe it is part of the unconscious or non-conscious, as we would say with neuroscience, because unconscious is to be not awake. Being the collective mind, I think he picked up on something. He may have consciously or unconsciously expressed it, but when we look at narcissism, which is a constant projection of the shadow in an outward way, requiring the external world to fill us up, we see that Pan's desire to be reunited with his shadow is an aspect that we can use as a metaphor for our own journey. Because narcissists are stunted in their maturity growth. They're stunted in their maturity. Things happen to them and cause them to constantly believe they have to have something from outside in order for them to be real. Whether it be our attention, our love, whatever, more food, more addictive substances, whatever. They have to have more of the outside coming to the inside in order to feel full or filled. So I think Pan's character was looking to be reunited with his shadow so that he could grow up, so that he could mature, so that he could move on. Narcissism happens in childhood, and it prevents the psyche from maturing completely. And it's very difficult for some people to see that narcissism. Now, me saying I love myself, that's something that is generally looked on as, oh, you love yourself? But in fact, I love myself. I'm in love with myself, and I'm married to myself. And that's an important place for me to be. Because I am my own best friend. I am my own worst enemy, but I am my own best friend. I love myself. I look at my inner child, and I love my inner child so much that I am able to look out and love everybody else's inner child. And that's a very important place to be because, okay, think about it this way. You see a person, a mature grown adult, throw them an throwing a temper tantrum, and you're like, they shouldn't be doing that. Well, actually, it's not your place to judge what they should be doing, but what you should be doing is having compassion for that person, that they're so stuck in their inner child, requiring the external world to fulfill their lack of control, that they're letting go of their control, letting go into their shadow aspects and expressing it in such a violent manner. Working third shift, I had a woman come in and she had no identification. Now, I knew she was of age, but because of company requirements and because of legal requirements, and because she was already intoxicated, I asked her for her identification. Well, this woman's wearing a onesie. That's the only way I can describe it. It's a sleeper thing. It's even got a hood. And she starts throwing a violent tantrum, cussing out, "You're the problem with the world today," and all of this stuff. And I just stepped back. But I looked at this fully grown, mature woman, intoxicated beyond safety, who simply refused to walk out to her car and get her identification, which she should have, by law, had on her person, and is required to present it to buy an age-restricted product. But instead, she's throwing a tantrum. I mean, literally, a 4-year-old high-chair tantrum because I wouldn't sell her beer. That's pretty violent. That's pretty rough. That's pretty stuck in the shadow. So we have to look at these things and realize them in ourselves. Now, while our shadow contains all the aspects of our potential, it is still up to our maturity level to decide which ones we're holding back and which ones we're bringing forth. And we can express our darkness in positive ways. We can express our darkness in some beautiful ways, some incredible artwork, some incredible songs, movies, plays, books have come from the darkest parts of the shadows in human psyches, where people have lived through certain things and expressed themselves in certain ways so that they're able to allow that part of themselves to be expressed in a positive manner. And it helps us to realize that we're not the only ones that feel these things. Admitted, we don't want to admit that Adolf Hitler exists in us, or the potential to be Adolf Hitler exists in us. We all want to see the potential for Jesus, or Joshua, as he would properly be called if it was translated, or Siddhartha Gautama, Buddha, or Mahatma Gandhi. And all of these people had their shadow aspects and admitted to them and admitted to overcoming them. So that's something we have to work within ourselves and our own psyches. Our maturity is the conscious decision to realize our enoughness and remove from that perspective through our life that we are enough, that our shadow can exist within us, that our shadow does exist within us, whether it's the light shadow of things we would hold our self back from, or our dark shadow, things we don't want to admit are there. But it's all there. The fact that we don't pick up the gun and shoot somebody, the fact that we don't pick up the knife and stab somebody, that's a really good thing. But who are we to be holding ourselves back from our greatness? Who are we to say, no, I can't be that person? Who are we to tell ourselves no and not sing our own song? Who are we to die with our song stuck inside us? Even if our song were only to inspire one person with one smile, that's enough. That's enough. So why not? Let your song out. People say, well, I can't sing. You ever listen to Bob Dylan? Incredible poet, incredible musician, not that great a singer. I'm not that great a singer myself. But I'm not going to die with my song inside me. And in fact, I've composed many. I'm not going to die with my stories inside me. I don't work on them as much right now as I would like to, because of full-time and part-time job, in addition to Helpful Hawk Healing. I'm working on freeing my heart to the point where I am helping you and others free their hearts, whether it be through music, whether it be through stories, whether it be through this channel. Realizing our enoughness and sitting in that enoughness and being enough in the present. Realizing that there's nothing outside of us going to fill us up or make us feel better about ourselves. That's our decision. Every emotion we have is our decision. We have a thought, it creates an emotional response. The brain cascades the chemicals. Then we have another thought that creates an emotional response. It's this constant cyclic cascade. But our emotions are decisions. And they can come strictly from the shadow, from what we're repressing or what we're holding ourselves back from. Or they can come from the heart, realizing these and these work together. Yin Yang, they aren't separate. They're complete. There's one. Yin Yang. It's a wholeness. Yoga is union. It's a wholeness. We are all the great ising its isness as us. And we're enough, or we wouldn't be allowed to be here in the first place. The reason we can soar is because we have metaphorical wings. It's just that we have to, as humans, decide to express those wings in ways that allow us to take off instead of sitting and just testing how they work. We have to do it. It is our decision to quit holding ourselves back, to stop restraining ourselves in ways that are not good for us. When I was sitting deep in my beer, whiskey, and marijuana, excuse me, I never physically needed those things. But emotionally, mentally, I did. And when it came to expressing my spirituality, it was always using those things as tools, opening the door, getting my conscious mind out of the way, getting myself to a point where when I walked into the fire, it didn't burn me. Because I and the fire were one. And without my conscious mind in the way, I could walk into the bonfire and rearrange it by hand and never have a blister. My hands would be dark and I'd have to wash the soot off. But not even a hair would be burned. And I look back on those days and I think, wow, I can still do that. I just no longer use the alcohol to get out of the way. I no longer use the drug to get out of the way. I just let go. And that's what the shadow is. The shadow is the aspect that we must realize is our full potential. And are we going to hold ourselves back from our full potential? Or are we going to look at the aspects of that full potential and say, no, I'm not going to let Adolf Hitler out, ever. However, I am going to let out the artist. We make our life a work of art. I highly suggest reading my favorite book ever. That was given to me by someone who discouraged me from doing shadow work. And that book is The Fifth Agreement by Don Jose Ruiz and Don Miguel Ruiz, who actually wrote the Four Agreements. I consider the Toltecs Western yogis. I consider the Essenes Middle Eastern yogis. I consider the Druids Western European yogis. And in fact, there was much interplay between India and Ireland and Britain. It is we who must realize our enoughness. It is we who must love our shadow, accept our shadow, and express the parts of us we want to express in the most beautiful ways. Keep holding yourself back, and the parts of you that are good aren't going to be out there. And because of holding back the good things, the bad things will come forward. The fear parts. And remember, it's not courage if you don't experience fear first. And is it finding excitement all around? That's, to me, is fear. So, I'm going to go for now. Remember, I am enough. I love myself. I am free and unshakable. And I love you too. Namaskar.